An SS officer who had fought at Kursk on the Eastern Front against Soviet troops for 3 years sat down after Bastogne and wrote 7 words. We were not fighting men. We were fighting something that had decided not to die. He was not being dramatic. He was writing a field journal entry. This was his attempt at a precise military observation. That sentence is where this video starts. Because when the most combat-experienced officers in the German military struggled to find language for what the 101st Airborne did to them in the winter of 1944, something worth understanding happened in those frozen Belgian forests. This is not a Hollywood story. No slow-motion flags, no swelling orchestras. This is a documented account of what happens to human beings at the absolute limit of endurance, told almost entirely through the words of the enemy. The 101st Airborne Division was activated in August of 1942 at Camp Claiborne, Louisiana. The Army pulled young men from farms in Iowa, factories in Detroit, fishing towns in Maine. It broke them down completely. Then, it built them into something designed for a specific purpose. Not physical superiority, something harder to measure and harder to destroy. General William Lee, the man who created American airborne doctrine, described what he was selecting for in one sentence. Give me men who understand that the word surrounded simply means the enemy is now in range in all directions. That is not motivational language. That is an operational philosophy. It means the situation most soldiers are trained to escape from is the situation these men were trained to fight from. The entire selection process, the physical demands, the controlled suffering, the systematic elimination of men who stopped when things became impossible, was designed to build soldiers who looked at a collapsing situation and decided it was still manageable, who decided there was still a way, who decided to keep moving forward. That philosophy is the only explanation for what the SS found when they surrounded Bastogne in December of 1944. And what they found there changed what several of them believed was possible for human beings to choose to endure. The German accounts begin here, and they do not end where you expect them to. On December 16, 1944, the German military launched the largest offensive operation on the Western Front since D-Day. 3 SS Panzer divisions punched through the Ardennes sector at full force. The plan was called Operation Watch on the Rhine. The objective was Antwerp. The logic was simple and nearly worked. Drive northwest through Belgium, split the Allied armies in 2, cut off their primary supply port, and force a negotiated peace before American industrial production made the outcome inevitable. The plan depended entirely on speed. The Germans had calculated that if they moved fast enough, the Allies would not be able to react before the breakthrough became irreversible. In the first 48 hours, they were right. 3 experienced divisions tore through sectors held by exhausted units pulled back for rest and inexperienced divisions seeing their first serious combat. Entire regiments were overrun. Communication lines collapsed. The fog of war was total. American commanders at every level were receiving contradictory information or no information at all. Into that chaos, Allied command made a single decision that would define the entire battle. They called the Screaming Eagles. The 101st Airborne Division was in Reims, France. They had just come off Market Garden in the Netherlands, a campaign that had pushed them past what most military planners would consider sustainable. They needed rest. They needed resupply. They needed time to replace equipment and treat the men who were still recovering from wounds that had not fully healed. They got 18 hours. The order came down on December 17th. The 101st was going to Bastogne. The paratroopers climbed into trucks. Most had no winter clothing. Temperatures were already dropping below 0. Many men were riding in open vehicles in standard field uniforms. Some had not eaten a proper meal in 2 days. They drove through the night toward a battle that was already going badly. Here is the detail that defines everything that followed. As the convoy moved east, it passed American units moving in the opposite direction. Combat veterans. Men who had been in the fight, men who had seen what was coming and were moving away from it as fast as they could. Those retreating soldiers shouted warnings at the trucks passing them. The Germans had tanks. The SS was coming. It was over. Turn around. The paratroopers of the 101st listened to all of it and kept driving toward the guns. The perimeter they were asked to hold was roughly 50 kilometers in circumference. They had approximately 15,000 men, many of them support troops rather than frontline infantry. They had limited ammunition, almost no artillery shells, inadequate medical supplies, no winter clothing in temperatures that would drop to minus 22 degrees Celsius. The Germans surrounding them had 5 divisions, armor, artillery, superior numbers in every category that military doctrine uses to predict outcomes. The encirclement was completed on December 21st. The Screaming Eagles were alone. What happened next, the Germans spent years trying to explain. On December 22nd, 4 days into the encirclement, 2 German officers approached American lines under a white flag. They carried a formal written ultimatum signed by General Heinrich von Lüttwitz, commanding the forces surrounding Bastogne. The document was precise and professional. It stated that the American position was hopeless, that continued resistance would result in the complete annihilation of the defending forces, that the honorable course was immediate and unconditional surrender. The acting American commander, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, read the ultimatum. His staff watched him, waiting. He said one word: nuts. His staff asked what he wanted to put in the written reply. He said to use that. Just that. The formal American response read, to the German commander, nuts. The American commander. The German officers who received the note asked the American officer who delivered it what the word meant. He told them it was the equivalent of go to hell. They carried the message back to von Lüttwitz. The SS divisions around Bastogne began their assault. What matters here is not the drama of the exchange. What matters is what it reveals about the psychological architecture of the entire defense. McAuliffe did not call a staff meeting. He did not consult his officers about the strategic implications of refusing surrender. He read a document telling him his men were going to be annihilated, and his first instinct was dismissal. Not defiance performed for an audience. Genuine dismissal. The offer did not register as a real option. That instinct was not unique to McAuliffe. It ran through the entire division. Sergeant Leighton Black was 22 years old from Harlan County, Kentucky. He was a combat medic with the 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment. On the night of December 23rd, his aid station came under direct assault. German forces were attempting to overrun a position that held wounded men who could not be moved. Black had a pistol and a carbine that belonged to a wounded soldier. He held the entrance to that aid station for 40 minutes until reinforcements arrived. When those reinforcements reached him, there were 3 dead German soldiers at the threshold. Black was still standing. He had a bayonet wound in his left arm that he had not reported because he had been too busy to stop. His commanding officer recommended him for the Silver Star. Black's explanation, delivered in the manner of men from Harlan County, was that he had been too busy to leave. Private First Class Vernon Horde was a machine gunner with the 327th Glider Infantry Regiment. On Christmas Eve, his position came under attack from a German armored column. A Panzer IV, 40 tons of steel moving through the dark toward his gun. Every soldier in that situation knows the same fact. A machine gun cannot penetrate tank armor. When a tank comes for a machine gun position, doctrine gives the crew 2 options: relocate or stay. Horde stayed. He fired on the infantry behind the tank, breaking the assault's cohesion, buying time for a bazooka team to reposition. The tank's main gun fired twice in his direction. The second round threw him several meters. He got up. He found his gun. He kept firing. The attack was repelled. Years later, asked why he had not retreated when the tank came, Horde answered with complete simplicity. That was my gun. Those were my guys. What else was I going to do? That sentence is not heroism in the way the word is usually used. It is the statement of a man who had made a prior decision so thoroughly that retreating had ceased to exist as a real option in his mind. He was not being brave in the moment. He had already decided, before the tank came, who he was going to be when it did. The Germans encountered this again and again. Not one soldier making a dramatic stand, an entire division of men who had each individually made that same prior decision. The SS had no tactical response to it. What they had instead was paperwork, reports, assessments, the written record of professional soldiers trying to explain something their training had not prepared them for. That paperwork is the most honest account of what happened at Bastogne that exists. SS Obersturmbannführer Otto Dinse was not a man given to sentiment. He was a senior staff officer with the 2nd SS Panzer Division, Das Reich. His division had fought at Kursk. It had operated in France in 1940, in the Soviet Union for 3 consecutive years. Its officer corps had an average of 3 years of direct combat experience. These were not soldiers learning war. These were professionals who had spent years studying what breaks men and what doesn't. In January of 1945, Dinse wrote a tactical assessment of the Bastogne campaign. The document was captured by Allied forces and later analyzed by the U.S. Army War College. It does not focus on American material superiority. It does not mention Allied air power or ammunition supply. It focuses on one thing. Dinse called it psychologische Immobilität, psychological immobility. He wrote that the American paratroopers demonstrated a capacity for holding defensive positions that exceeded anything observed in Soviet, British, or other American units. He attributed this to what he described as a fundamentally different relationship between the individual soldier and the concept of retreat. His exact words? The American parachute soldier appears to have been conditioned to treat the abandonment of a position as a form of personal failure rather than a tactical option. This creates defensive cohesion that is nearly impossible to break through conventional assault methods. Read that sentence carefully. A senior SS officer, writing a serious tactical document for his superiors, is telling them that the reason 5 divisions could not break 15,000 encircled men with no winter clothing, limited ammunition, and no resupply was not a question of firepower. It was a question of psychology. And he was right. The psychology he was describing was not accidental. It was the direct result of a selection and training process designed to eliminate men who would stop when stopping became logical. Christmas Day, 1944, minus 22 degrees Celsius. The men of the 101st had been fighting continuously for 8 days, ammunition critically low, wounded men receiving field dressings because surgical supplies were gone, the forest floor frozen solid. 5 SS divisions launched a coordinated pre-dawn assault on the American perimeter. It achieved a brief penetration. German tanks entered the town of Chaumont on the western edge before being stopped. The fighting went room to room, building to building. American soldiers who had been in frozen positions for 8 days straight fought through streets with rifles, grenades, and, in several documented cases, entrenching tools. SS tank commander Hans Menges wrote in his logbook on the afternoon of December 25th, "We gained 300 meters this morning. We lost 47 men taking them. The Americans recaptured the meters by nightfall." I have no words for what these men are. 47 men for 300 meters, recaptured by nightfall. That is not a battle report. That is a man trying to process something that does not fit his operational framework. The final German account belongs to the man who started it all, General Heinrich von Luttwitz, the same officer who sent the surrender ultimatum on December 22nd, the man who expected the word nuts to be followed by white flags. In his post-war memoirs, he was asked directly why the German forces did not take Bastogne. He wrote, "I have been asked many times why we did not take Bastogne. The honest answer is that we did not take it because the men defending it had decided that they would not allow it to be taken. And I had no operational response to that decision." That is the most devastating sentence a military commander can write. It means, I brought everything doctrine says should work. It did not work, because my opponent chose an option that doctrine does not account for. The 101st Airborne came out of the Ardennes with 19,000 casualties, killed, wounded, and missing. What they had gone through was not a battle in the conventional sense. It was an extended test of the absolute outer edge of human military endurance. And the edge turned out to be further out than anyone, including the Germans, had believed it was. Werner Kortenhaus survived the war. He was captured in April of 1945, held for 18 months, then released into a Germany trying to understand what it had become. He eventually wrote a memoir, privately published in 1961. The chapter on Bastogne is 3 times longer than any other chapter in the book. Near the end of it, he describes a specific night assault through the forests south of Bastogne, the approach through the trees, the snow that muffled everything to near silence, the moment the American positions opened fire. He writes, "They fired as if they had been waiting for precisely us at precisely that moment, as if they had decided before we came that they were going to stay, and they were going to hold, and they were not going to let us through. And we came at them with everything we had, and they did not let us through." Then, after 17 years of trying to find the right words, he writes his final sentence about the men of the 101st. What those men were, I cannot say in military terms. What they were, they were. Language gave up. What was left was just the fact of the thing. 15,000 young Americans from small towns and working-class families made, each individually, the same decision. This place, these people. And whatever comes out of the dark is going to have to deal with that decision. The Germans called it psychological immobility. The Americans just called it the 101st. Here is the question worth sitting with. The men at Bastogne were not born different. They were built, selected, trained, and conditioned to treat stopping as a personal failure rather than a rational option. Which means the thing that held Bastogne was not a rare quality that some people have and others don't. It was a choice, made in advance, before the tank came, before the temperature hit -22, before the ammunition ran low. The decision about who you are going to be when things become impossible is always made before things become impossible. If you want more stories like this one, stories where the most important thing that happened wasn't the weapon, but the decision behind it, subscribe. Every week, one story. Every week, one question that doesn't have an easy answer.